our feelings are super valid in that way. They are not just something private, personal, individual, something that we have to deal with as individuals. Instead, they're feedback in the system that something needs attention.
Welcome to another episode of the Environment in Canada podcast, a podcast about the environment in Canada by Sierra Club Canada. I'm Jessica Murray, Sierra Club Canada's Line 5 community organizer, and I'm part of a cross-border effort to protect our Great Lakes from a devastating oil spill. To learn more about Line 5, follow us on Instagram at Sierra Club Ontario and join the movement to safeguard the largest freshwater source on our planet. Today, I'm speaking with Sally Ludwig, who is a retired relational therapist, facilitator, consultant, and educator. Sally lives in Guelph, Ontario, where I recently moved to, and has devoted her life to supporting activists, students, ecotherapists, and other community members during this critical to planet time that you yourself probably know so well. Today, Sally is an elder that facilitates the Work That Reconnects, which is a body of work with seed teacher Joanna Macy. The story Sally chooses to live by is this: people working together, each contributing their unique gifts, passions, and skills, can unleash the intention, talents, and collaborative energies to create a livable future for ourselves, our descendants, and all beings yet to come into life. I hope you'll enjoy this conversation as we spiral through what exactly is the work that reconnects and how it applies to our work as changemakers and ancestors birthing a regenerative world. Before we begin, just a reminder that you can take action on environmental issues by visiting sierraclub.ca. We have tons of petitions, other actions and events, and regular news updates you can sign up for on the homepage. You can also find Sierra Club Canada on social media, and you can listen to the Environment in Canada podcast on the Harbinger Media Network, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts. This podcast also airs on CKUT Broadcast Radio in Montreal, 90.3 FM, bi-weekly on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and on CHMA Radio in Sackville, New Brunswick on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Atlantic Daylight Time. Don't forget to click follow or subscribe so you can get the latest episodes from us. Good morning, Sally.
Good morning. Nice to meet you, Jessica.
Yeah, very nice to meet you as well. Welcome to the Environment in Canada podcast. Very happy to have you here with us. And today we're going to be talking about the Work That Reconnects, which I, not too long ago, actually went on a Work That Reconnects retreat with actually another Sierra Club Canada member. So we were all very jazzed up, had an incredible time, and I'm really excited to kind of make those connections between the Work That Reconnects, activism, conservation, saving the planet, community, resilience, all of those good things. I thought to begin together, we kind of in the flavor of the Work That Reconnects, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, share with our listeners who you are, and one thing that you love about being alive on planet Earth right now.
I love that, starting from the place of aliveness and gratitude and love. That's a beautiful part of the work, and so wise to start us in any consideration. I'm Sally. Been around a good while. I'm considered and sort of considering myself an elder and a mentor in some senses now. I'm actively facilitating the Work That Reconnects still. Gotten reactivated with that in the last couple of years, actually. A white settler person who came from the US to Guelph. I lived in northern Michigan just before coming here, and in several places in the US. And where we are now, this is the watershed of the Great Lakes here and of the Speed River, and the territory originally of the Chononton people, who are also known as Attawandaron, and of Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people, and many others who traveled and traded and lived from time to time in this area. And we're home now also to people from those original nations and groups, and also to other Métis and Inuit people. And there's a lively culture of Indigenous folks happening here in Guelph, which is really a great thing. I live with my partner, Christine, and some animals. We have a dog and a cat and 5 chickens here who are laying eggs for us. And we have a guest dog visiting right now, too. So I love animals. They're a real source of aliveness and love, unconditional affection. My work was as a relational therapist. I worked with couples, families, and individuals, and I loved that field. That was wonderful work. I retired about 5 years ago now. I loved doing therapy with that approach because it's a systemic approach. Unlike some therapeutic approaches like analysis and psychology generally, family therapy doesn't look for pathology within individuals, but instead considers living systems, whole system, the relationship that any person is in, humans, and also the earth others that we're in relationship with. So there's room for therapy approaches and somatic based approaches and all kinds of helpful therapies within that realm. So that was fantastic work. And also I'm very happy to be retired. Now I have time for a lot of other things. Still just going on about me. I love plants. I like to garden. I have a permaculture food forest here at our yard in the city with all kinds of fruit trees and bushes growing and wonderful food for humans and other than humans. And music is a big part of my life, a big part of what helps me stay energized and resilient. And making music, singing together is one of my best things in the world.
Beautiful. And is there anything, I mean, you named so many wonderful things about being alive, and I'm taking notes, but you've touched on so many of the terms and words that I've personally been really loving. But is there anything else about being alive on planet Earth right now that you're really loving?
I'm really loving seeing a lot of activism, a lot of fresh activism happening in the world now. There's so much dire need for it. I find encouraging and energizing. So I'm grateful to see all of that, and it really helps enliven me.
I know that you're volunteering as a community organizer. You also are a founding member of Transition Guelph and a member of the planning team for Global Climate Strikes, the week of activities in Guelph and Wellington. Yeah, I think sometimes people are kind of like, okay, so therapy, how is that going to relate to activism? And then there's this like larger concept of the environment. So I was wondering if maybe that's a good place to kind of unpack things a little bit more, because one thing that really resonated for me in kind of getting more deeper into the body of the work that reconnects is this concept of how we as individuals, we pathologize our feelings and pathologize a lot of these, like it's a problem. Whereas maybe you can definitely speak to this probably better than I can. The work that reconnects has a very different lens as to how we understand anxiety, depression, despair, grief. Like how does that relate for you in relation to the work that reconnects, and how does that connect to activism?
That's a great area to look at, the work that reconnects. One of the beautiful insights of Joanna Macy, who's the main founder of the work, together with other colleagues, is that feelings matter. At the time that she developed some of the group processes to experience and share emotions, it was a real, I think, a real early feminist action, a feminist approach, because as we know, the realm of feelings and emotion in this society, I'm talking about Northern European-based industrialized capitalist society, feelings are considered a realm of the feminine, which means less important than rationality, which is thought to be a male characteristic, which is ridiculous. But there we are. And expressing feelings or even having them is considered a problem, a sign of weakness, a vulnerability, when men particularly are enculturated to present themselves as all-knowing, invulnerable. They know what to do. They know how to fix it. They're right. They have to be right. this is huge generalizations, of course. There are a lot of men who understand the problems with these systems and the oppression that brings onto men and women. But still, to honor the place of feelings is therapeutically wise, because repressed feelings are still there. They're not gone, and they affect everything. They affect our actions. And in the work that reconnects, we acknowledge that trying to suppress or push away those feelings and numb ourselves out takes a lot of energy, and it's living in untruth. And that takes a psychological, emotional energy in itself. And blocking off that whole area of feelings limits us as human people and limits what we can do. And that energy then is not available to do the things that we would like to be doing on behalf of the earth, on behalf of justice. So expressing the feelings is actually a sign of strength, of courage to bring our whole selves to relationship with the world, rather than live on in this sort of myth of separation that we're trained in by this industrialized society that teaches us that nature and humanity are two different things. And that goes with the whole mindset that nature is there for humans to exploit and extract value from and monetize and capitalize. And we know that's not true at all. We are nature. We are earth.
And I would go even a little bit further, where, from my understanding of the work that reconnects, is that at times it can even be experienced as if I'm feeling something. Not only is it mine, but sometimes that feeling is a natural something emerging in me because it is coming of the earth and it's being felt by me, awakening me as the earth's immune system to then wake up and do something about it.
Yes, absolutely. When I say we are earth, that's part of it. We are earth come into consciousness and into beings who feel emotion. And so our distress is the distress of the world. It might be felt in personal terms, but we are an element of earth. And so our feelings are super valid in that way. They are not just something private, personal, individual, something that we have to deal with as individuals. And instead, they're feedback in the system that something needs attention.
And to pathologize that as something wrong almost prevents us from then taking the next step of seeking out healing, whatever that might look like in that moment.
Yes, and whatever those feelings are encouraging us needs to happen, that we want to be doing if our channels are unblocked and we are responsive.
I want to also kind of cycle back a little bit more, just to kind of give folks who are not familiar with Joanna Macy maybe more information about her, because I think here's another kind of a challenge sometimes when we start thinking about emotions in the world of the feminine. There's this idea that it's woo-woo or like witchcraft. I think it's helpful sometimes for those people that, of course, have been indoctrinated and inherited these concepts as if they're just unrefutably so objective truth, that Joanna herself was a very rigorous scholar. She herself was also an activist. A lot of her work started with fighting against nuclear, or really, instead of saying fighting against, maybe I should say more like she was really advocating for this kind of long-term concept of guardianship because of what had happened through nuclear testing and technologies.
That's right.
So
yeah, she's got a long history of facing reality head on in all its dimensions, and looking at the nuclear industry and the defense industry at the time. She found herself creating ways to deal with that rather than, just trying to dismiss it or live apart from it. She set up the guardianship idea as a way of looking at the long term, getting out of this short-term time frame that our society operates in so often, and looking at what's going to happen in the future in deep time. And so it sounds like you're acquainted with the guardianship project idea. It's such a great idea. the plan was to set up ways for people in the future, humans in the future, no matter what their systems of recording knowledge or no matter what their language is, to set up signals where there were repositories of nuclear waste, other nuclear products that live on and on into the future. Set up ways to notify people that that's a no-go area, that's toxic, that's poison, and to really take care to set up people to have generations of guardians over those places so that they wouldn't be allowed to get out and contaminate the rest of the earth. So that focus on deep time has been one of Joanna's gifts to us all for a long time. So there she's looking far, far into the future and thinking, okay, what are the consequences of our human actions? And how can we take steps to deal with them in the most healthy way? And in deep time, as you know, she also looks backward and invites us all to look backward to way, way, way back to even the beginnings of the cosmos. He talks about the primal flaring forth from which everything came, the universe and the life itself all came. I love that part of the teaching as well. We can talk about more about the future and the past, but thinking about the cosmic past and the past of Earth as a living planet, that's such a great source of connection for us, a sense that we are part of a big, big picture spanning back all the generations of humanity, all the generations of life on Earth, and everything that life has learned along the way that's enabled organisms to survive. And here we are now, surviving. All of that intelligence and knowledge is within us and accessible to us. So thinking about us as activists, that's a great source of strength and of knowing that we're resourced. We're not just these little fragmentary ego beings trying to change the world all on our own. The whole of life and the whole of the history of Earth is behind us and within us.
Like the words that come up for me as you're speaking are like power with.
Yeah. And power through. As you talked about the earth feeling through us, that those currents of energy and wisdom in a sense, we are enacting them as channels of all of life. We're speaking for life, feeling for life, and feeling and living as life.
And yeah, I think just to even kind of situate us even more, like I think something that's been very helpful for me in my relationships here, as I also kind of nestle newly into Guelph, is, I think sometimes folks feel like they need to hide away their feelings or feel like it's for like my own private matter. And I find there's just such like a relief when you just name like, like feeling anxious or like going through kind of like cycles of depression is like actually like pretty normal considering what's going on the planet. And the second you say that, everyone's like, oh, thank goodness it's not just me. It's like, oh, right. Okay. Like what a concept that like this would be such a natural response to just the nature of our crises. And it's no longer just our emotions. It's also, I don't know about you, but like I'm just surrounded by people that are living in crisis, medical challenges, people having heart attacks at the age of 35. People, I just found out yesterday, a good friend of mine, they're First Nations, and of course, like because of all of the toxic metals from the mining industry, of course they have cancer, of course, so all of these things that just, oh my goodness, like over and over again, like it's like what we're doing to the planet is clearly showing up through us as well. So
in our feelings and in our bodies and in our thoughts, in our outlook on our fellow humans and on the future, for sure. I love that you referred to the relief that everyone feels when you name the truth, when you tell about reality the way it really is, in all those dimensions of feeling and of despair and anxiety and fear and anger and everything that comes up for us. And part of the strength of the work that reconnects is the the wisdom of acknowledging that reality in community, of speaking with other people and hearing others speak and hearing what we ourselves say and being witnessed by people around us who actually get it and being able to act as witness for a group of people. That's another resourcing dimension in a big way, because it overcomes that sensation that we're alone, with how it feels and our sense of powerlessness. I think that sense of powerlessness is cultivated by this industrialized society to keep us compliant, to keep us quiet and just going along with, as you said, the way that we're taught that things are. This is just what's real. Well, it's not. It's just a story. It's a narrative, one way of looking at what's real. And Joanna's scholarship as a Buddhist, someone interested in Buddhist ideas, I would say, more than a religious Buddhist probably, that tradition is very strong on accepting reality as it is and really looking deeply into that within ourselves and also within the world, rather than letting ourselves continue in ignoring big parts of it or being fooled by selective narratives.
Yeah. And I would love to kind of connect this with, like, you and I both are community organizers. So I don't know about you, but I found even if I can bring just a couple droplets of elements of the work that reconnects, it changes the dynamic of how we work together.
Yes.
So whether we're fighting pod pipelines, whether we're pushing to reduce lawns, like when people have to come together to work together, I find there's just a different feel. Like intimacy kind of drives us together forward in a different way. And I'm curious to know what your experience has been. And as you kind of also continue along in community organizing and working with people towards, projects that go beyond like, what am I going to be paid for this? This is like, we're talking about survival and evolution of our planet, of our life here on Earth. And what is more important than community? And we're seeing this heightened amount of people waking up to these ideas of intersectionality. Like, why does Gaza matter in relation to the climate crisis? And why does that matter to what people are being paid a living wage? Why does all that matter? How does that connect? And it's incredible to start seeing more and more folks really get it. So please tell our listeners, what is the work that reconnects?
It's a body of work developed over decades by Joanna Macy and her colleagues, and the facilitators network have all been part of creating it, but mostly Joanna's starting. It's a set of ideas and perspectives and also practices. The work includes teachings of some concepts that help put our times into context. Also some guided meditations and experiential group processes to get the perspectives in an embodied, lived way. And to allow us to feel emotions and share them, express emotions and feelings and body sense, as well as cognitive understanding. Joanna's work draws on her scholarship in lots of areas, in spiritual wisdom traditions of different kinds around the world, including Buddhist teachings especially. Also the prophetic and the mystical heart of Christianity, creation spirituality. She also has learned a lot from traditional indigenous knowledge on Turtle Island and also from Tibetan people. And she brings in contemporary science, including living systems work, complexity theory. And from her decades as an activist, she's learned a lot about how change can happen with social psychology and theory of change. And deep ecology is another huge influence. So there's a whole lot going on, and she's managed to create experiences that help people get all of this internal to shift our perspective. And the intention of it all is to reconnect us with the earth, with our communities, with ourselves, because we're brought up in this culture in such a sense of disconnection, of separation of humans from nature, of people from each other in this competition and scarcity model that we're taught in. So it's a philosophical and a cultural reclaiming of our sense of each other and of ourselves and of our ecological identity, our connection with the larger whole of the living earth and of the universe, really. Joanna has said that her intention in creating this work and in facilitating it has been to help us as things unravel further with all of the disasters that are unfolding now, so that we don't turn on each other as things get worse, but instead so that we can turn toward each other in solidarity to work together for a living world.
No, I was just gonna say that as you're speaking, I get the image of like a tapestry, just so many different threads from different all around the world, different
Yeah.
practices, different people,
Yeah.
different wisdom being woven together, and also a good amount of science and scientific as
Mhm.
well. So it's just really beautiful to see that. And I think there's like a reflection there where I think that reflects us being in this time of high intersectionality where it's like all of the roads, all the different roads leading into one place. And
Yes, I agree. I think Joanna was one of the early thinkers and teachers to recognize the connections of everything, the intersections of so many things, not just our own identities and where we're positioned, but in um, our larger identity as Earth, as part of the human community. Yeah. The map is the work is really cool. It developed into sort of a map that it follows that takes a spiral course through several kinds of what can be thought of as stations or states, really. And it ended up to be kind of a spiral. It goes around, loops around, comes back and can go through the same sequence again, but it's a spiral rather than a circle because each time we experience it, we are in a different place. So it recognizes that change is constant. Shall I tell a little bit about the spiral map?
yeah, I think please do. I think that's very helpful in terms of because this is such a huge body of work to have something to kind of tie it together is always very helpful, I think, especially for people that are new to this body of work.
Yeah, yeah, this really does give a framework, a context, so that we can understand where it is we're going to go in one of these experiential workshops, for example. And the spiral is useful for us to frame experiences every day as well. So the
Mm.
first thing that Joanna has learned from Indigenous people, especially, is the importance of starting out with gratitude, with what we love, with what makes us happy to feel alive and energized, and what we want to protect is there too. So to turn our attention to gratitude, first of all, gratitude in that larger sense, how wonderful it is to be alive and what a miracle it is to be an embodied creature on the earth. That starting out really grounds us and helps give us a strength and connection, a sense of grounding, so that we can look at some of the difficult stuff about being alive now. When we think about what we love and what we want to protect, that opens our hearts to what we care about and what's in danger and in peril now on the earth. People often think of other humans who are important to them, their children, relatives, friends. Um, they're the groups of people that they really are connected with and care about. And there are often disasters and distress going on, oppression going on, and risk to those people that are important to us. And we experience that distress as pain for the world. I think many people listening to us know what that's like.
Mm.
What's that sorrow and distress also goes into the anger that we have, our fury and frustration at the wrongs that are going on, and other places as well, the fear, the emptiness and numbness that we can experience. So starting out with gratitude opens us up to all of that in a way that's really subversive. of the industrial economy that we live in, because the powers that be are better off if we're disconnected, if we're not feeling our feelings, and if we're not aware of what's really distressing. The way that it's not really part of acceptable conversation in a lot of settings to talk about how we feel about what's going on. That sense of disconnection from each other and from our real experience gets subverted and opened up by starting with gratitude and then going into a willingness to experience and not only experience, but share with each other what's hurting us about life on the earth right now. So she calls that part honoring our pain for the world. So we don't just feel it, we honor it and respect our sorrow and our grief and our anger and our fear, because those are important feedback into the living system of Earth. We or Earth become conscious, and the consciousness of what's distressing and painful is important feedback into the whole Earth system. I think you've referred to the saying that we're Earth's immune system come online in these times. And the feedback of what feels hurtful to us, that's the feedback that sets off the immune system and starts a healthy response. We then move in the spiral from honoring our pain for the world to seeing with new and ancient eyes. And this is where Joanna brings in a lot of the teaching about, first of all, about those emotions that we experience. We can recognize then that our sorrow and grief are kind of the flip side of our love for the world. And that our anger that we experience at the wrongdoing and the oppression means that we are passionate about justice. So those two are the different sides, the different hands of the same experience. The fear that we could experience about the future, our dread of what's happening and what might happen either in near term or the long term to those that we care about, that fear is a sign of our caring and of our courage to go ahead and feel that and then to take action. And even that sense of despair that comes along, that emptiness and numbness, not feeling like there's anything we can do or like we know what to do. Depression and burnout are there, live in that territory. Even that numbness and emptiness is making a space for something new to arise. So if we can accept and honor that situation, that's a creative, generative space where something new can come about. And so we open ourselves up to that. We also can recognize in the seeing with new and ancient eyes, what are other perspectives? What are the perspectives of Indigenous people around the world on what's happening? And where can we learn from that and take nourishment from that? So that then we can be ready for the final stage of the spiral, which is going forth with this changed perspective, with this knowledge of the science and of the traditional teachings, and of the Buddhist sense of what's real and what's real in ourselves and in the world that we talked about. We can be ready to figure out what's our intention for action. That intention, that shared intention and individual gets strengthened by going through this whole process. And also by looking at where we fit in time since the beginning of the cosmos, from way back into the deep time and through a lineage of our ancestors, and also on into future time. What's it going to be like for the living ones that come after us? One of Joanna's teachings that I really like is that when the future beings and their lives, their claim on life, can become real to us, that changes everything. That changes our intention of action and our sense of ourselves as being ready and to make any difference we can, whether it's small or large, and also brings the insight that we don't know what the impact, what the effect of our actions and our choices and our attitudes is going to be like. Her metaphor of the ripples on water, Joanna's memoir is a beautiful book that people might enjoy looking at. It's called Widening Circles, and it's all about the connection, the rippling of actions out into the world in ways that we'll never know. So we don't know what
Mm.
effect our actions that we can take and our connections that we make with each other, what the effect is going to be for people living now, for all the other living beings on Earth, and especially for the ones coming after us in the future. So it's
Mm.
a very strengthening kind of spiral. And then Joanna has recognized that we can experience that in the course of a 10-day intensive workshop, or in the course of a day as we go through it, or even in just a few moments in our personal experience. We can move so rapidly from a sense of being alive and living into what's sorrowful and what's grieving us in the world, and if we remember that we can see that with in a new way and with the traditional wisdom, then we can be ready to be strengthened and nourished by our own experience as living beings and as part of living body of earth, and be ready to take actions to help the healing.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing all of that. As you were sharing that, I was having kind of memories of spirals that I've been through and how it really opens us to the mystery. There's like an element of you like something new is there, but you don't know what it is yet. And I find we live in
Yeah,
and like in regular day life, we're often living in this place of like what's known and kind of operating from like an original inherited program. But the second you're in spiral space, there's like a freshness to it. And I always take
yeah,
away something that I just a new way of seeing something, and it completely changes the operating system that I'm coming from. And so I was reminded
yeah,
of that and have a lot of
yeah.
gratitude for that practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. That's to go through that spiral process in a conscious, aware way. It's very generative. New ideas come, and as we connect with other people and with our deeper selves, uh, things come to life that we couldn't have predicted. It's like a synergistic, emergent outcome of
Hmm.
us giving ourselves nourishment and strengthening as a system. Yeah,
Hmm.
it's a very beautiful process.
Yeah, and I think I just want to invite our listeners to imagine. It might sound really far-fetched, but could you imagine if, like, the people that you work with on a daily basis, whether, you don't have to be an activist, you don't have to be a community organizer to imagine this, but could you imagine what it would be like to then, have that experience with the people that, you're working with day in and day out? Like, that just adds a whole other level of depth and
Mhm.
caring, and you know that you're into this larger context of what's happening on planet Earth together. Like, that just nutrition. Wow.
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah, it feeds our spirit. Yeah. And that goes together for me with what you said earlier about bringing elements of the work that reconnects into all kinds of relationships, all kinds of conversations that we have, even day to
Hmm.
day, in any kind of a gathering that's not, it's meant to be a planning meeting, or who knows, a book club, all kinds of gatherings. It can be really useful to bring in just some elements of the work, like turn to the person next to you and share what brings you alive, what you're happy about in being alive on earth this morning, or
Hmm.
what really concerns you, or any of those things where we hear ourselves speak truth and we are
Hmm.
witnessed for that. It does exactly that. It brings a new level of depth and truth to the relationship that is like food for us.
And love, I would add. I cannot help but, like, when people share from that place, I cannot help but just be like, oh dear, I
Yeah,
love this human being.
yeah,
Like, not in like a romantic kind of way, but like in a platonic, oh my goodness, like we are, like, there's a sense of homecoming for me when we
yes,
share that way. It's like, oh,
yes,
there, we're together again.
yeah, beautiful. Yeah, here's a fellow being we're really related, and it makes for really considerate, respectful gatherings and meetings when we look at each other with through those eyes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. I brought a letter from the future beings into one of the planning meetings I had around line 5 work, so
Ah,
stopping pipelines. And it was really profound because one, none of the people in the circle were expecting that we were going to go there because we were there to plan, we're planning actions, figuring out who our targets are and da da da. And then so I'm finally like, okay, like how are we going to wrap up this day? And so the room was predominantly male, predominantly white and male. And so of course, when I announced what we're going to do, they look at me like, we're going to do what? But like they went along with it and it was really profound. I was really amazed by how in the sharing period, I thought they would just kind of be like, yeah, that was weird, or like, yeah, that was interesting. I didn't expect this or that. But almost each person wanted to share their entire everything that they wrote. So that was really, really surprising to me. And then somebody even cried. Because so the premise of the letter from future beings is you're basically writing a letter from someone 200 years or 7 generations out, and you're writing back to yourself. So just for our listeners to understand the context. And for this participant, he's like, I don't have children. So this was like so powerful for me to invoke my what you termed earlier, your moral imagination. And just what that does to your nervous system and your imagination is it's like it's hard to explain. It opens you up to mystery of like things that you didn't even know were inside of you.
Yes, it does, and that's nourishing to the spirit and to our energies. It sounds like for that person, it was meaningful to consider themselves as an ancestor to all the beings to come after him. After
That's
that,
right.
we are, what we're doing now in terms of biology, also in terms of social concepts, of memes, of thought, actions. Those are all a legacy to all the life that comes after us. And it sounds like your letter really brought that forward in a really meaningful way for them. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And as you were speaking, I think of like kind of the Buddhist concept of like what's left behind is there was our actions, right?
Yeah.
Like we come and go and life comes and goes, but like our actions are built upon by other beings that we don't know yet.
Yes.
And that is a part of that kind of constant stream or river of legacy of what's happening for the planet.
Yes. Yeah. And that question of that goes with the how do you want to live, knowing what you know. With that question is how can we be a good ancestor to the ones that come after us?
Yeah.
In refreshing us and resourcing us, these processes are so important for activism, for folks who are into doing all kinds of activism, because the direct action kind of activism especially can be so exhausting and depleting. And I'm sure you've encountered burnout is a real risk or a real feature of what can happen. Part of the work that reconnects that I love is a teaching that replenishing ourselves, taking care of ourselves in the same way we want our beloved earth to be cared for, because we are earth after all, is a key. So not to take an extractive approach to ourselves, to our own time and energy, where we try to get the most out of it that we possibly can, and then can end up burning out and needing to leave the field of action for a time. Instead, to take rest as resistance and really value our body, our spirit, our community connections as we go along is a good antidote to burning out. And also the knowledge, acknowledging that we do need to step forward, step back at times, step into action, do things, energize a lot, and then have also rest time and recovery, whether it's hours or sometimes longer, days or weeks or longer for some people, depending on how severe the burnout gets. So that living out an anti-extractive life view is such a strong act of resistance, caring for ourselves.
And there's so much shame around it still now. It's like, well, that and it's expensive. There's so many things that go on there. So just to see it as all part of the process. Like if our focus is to like heal the planet, save the species, or whatever it is that that our rest is a part of that process. It's not separate. And nothing is separate, really.
Absolutely. That it's part of us living the life that we want for all of Earth to have,
Mm,
not to be over here in the past, trying to operate so something will come about in the future, but bringing it into being right now with our people that we're with.
I love that. I really
Yeah.
love that.
I like also, I wanted to say a little bit about the different aspects of activism that Joanna and her colleagues teach about. Did you get some of that action, the different dimensions of the Great Turning and of activism in the
Yeah,
retreat?
do you mean like holding actions
Yeah.
and yeah, yeah. Maybe that can be the final kernel that we leave. I'm just like checking in on the time and seeing that as
Oh,
much as we'd love to keep going, it always goes fast. So yeah, I think that is a really helpful model, I think, for activists, especially as burnout is inevitable. I think burnout is inevitable no matter what you're doing, really. You could be an accountant and you'd probably
yeah.
still face burnout in some way. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's a helpful model for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, we do get exhausted, but burnout is a matter of degrees, and it can happen to people who are really committed and really active in a way that then incapacitates them for much too long.
Hmm.
It can be really harmful to our long-term health and emotional, mental well-being. So it's good to avoid. And part of the way that we can avoid it and keep ourselves healthy is to recognize that activism has other forms besides the holding actions.
Yeah.
The holding actions are the ones that people are most familiar thinking of when we think of activism. Boycotts, petitions, demonstrations, movements for divestment or for climate change, climate health, and all of those things. That's one dimension, and that's important. That's vital, and we need people doing all of those things now. We also need other dimensions. We need a dimension of people analyzing the big picture and understanding the systems that we're living under and how to bring those toward health more. Consciousness of what's going on and the writing and analysis and reporting, information sharing, knowledge sharing about where we are and what's happening. And a third dimension is also change of consciousness, not only knowing with our minds, with our cognition, what the facts are and what the real picture is, but shifting consciousness to embrace that wider identity, our ecological identity, ourselves as living Earth, living cosmos. And that bringing that about is one of the places where facilitating the work that reconnects really acts, because building
Hmm.
with that building that consciousness is also building community, which is so life-giving for us. And then recently, one of the longtime facilitators of the work that reconnects introduced the idea of a fourth dimension of the Great Turning and of activism for it, which is nurturing life.
Mm.
And I'm drawn to that. I like thinking of including that. Nurturing life is at the back or at the bottom of all of those dimensions of action. We do this because we love life and we want it to continue.
Mm.
But to look at that as a separate dimension of what's really taking action on behalf of Earth, I think is really helpful. So gardening, parenting, feeding people, they're part of the other dimensions as well. When I say feeding people, I'm thinking that's also a vital holding action to kind of reduce the damage and the harms that the industrialized system is doing. But just
Hmm.
nurturing life in itself feeds us and feeds the rest of the world. And that's one of the ways of living that humans need to really cultivate and have at our core in order for life on Earth to continue.
Hmm. So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that fourth one. I hadn't heard that one before, so that's really beautiful.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts as we go along about the place of that and yeah, what that means to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important practice. I see it potentially falling under the shifts in consciousness, but yeah, I think it very well might deserve its own own place.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think for people to kind of value it, not only is just like, oh, it's just my hobby. It's like, no,
yeah,
this is also integral to tending to the earth and
yes,
seeing us restore it to something that is sustaining and not
yeah,
destructive and
yeah.
time bound.
And it is sustaining for us to recognize that at times, if we need and want to step away from direct action or any of those dimensions, and perhaps put our time into other things that heal us and heal the rest of the earth, we're also doing activism in those times. We find ourselves kind of popping out in one of the other dimensions. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and it again, it's synergistic. It emerges from the whole of what's going on rather than being an isolated activity.
Mm-hmm. So beautiful. Somewhat sad to say that that's about the time that we have together this morning.
Yeah,
Is
I'd
there
like.
any final kernel that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Oh my, I'd like. Colonel, let's see. I'd like to encourage people to look further into the work that reconnects
Mhm.
online on the web. There are lots of good videos of Joanna speaking and a beautiful film about her and books and articles, a lot, a lot. And there are a lot of people in Guelph now who are interested
Mhm.
in communities of practice and who are getting together to support each other in deepening our learning and practicing the processes. And I also want to extend an invitation to a Council of All Beings that I'm going to be facilitating in October coming up, October 20th. It's a Sunday afternoon at
Okay.
Ignatius Jesuit Center.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's
Definitely
part
have
of
to come
an
check it out.
Ignatius Cedar Circle series of gatherings, which is a lot of different topics.
Hmm.
And I'm going to be able to bring a Council of All Beings, followed by a potluck supper on the
Oh,
20th.
amazing. I'm definitely there.
Oh, good. That'll be great.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me this morning. And I hope to our listeners that this was some nourishment in its own way. Hopefully, it left you some ideas of ways that you can take care of yourself while also taking care of the planet. Thank you so much, Sally.
Thank you very much, Jessica. It's a pleasure to have a chance to talk about this wonderful work.
Hi everyone, Connor Curtis, Head of Communications at Sierra Club Canada, jumping in here to do the Q&A for today's episode. And before I get into the Q&A answer, I just want to say these answers are on behalf of ourselves and not on behalf of our guests. Today, I want to chat a little bit about some of the media debate for the Q&A that we're seeing around carbon pricing in Canada. Now, we've done 2 episodes on this podcast about carbon pricing, one about the relation to Alberta getting off coal, and the other one entitled The Carbon Tax Lie. You can go check those out, and I encourage you to do so. One of the things that we highlighted in both is the huge amount of misinformation on carbon pricing out there. And I say this not just to people who agree with and support carbon pricing, but to those who don't, believe in carbon pricing and carbon taxation as a solution on climate change. One of the big things that we have found out in doing those podcast episodes and brought to light in doing those podcast episodes is that when we talk about inflation in this country, when we talk about the hardships families are facing in this country, the idea that carbon pricing has much, if anything, to do with that at all is kind of ludicrous. It really doesn't impact inflation. According to over 400 economists, most families are getting more back in Canada, and those are economists from various different backgrounds with various different philosophies saying that. So if you believe in carbon pricing or you don't, talking about it as if it's the reason people are suffering in this country is basically a massive distraction from the things that are actually causing inflation in this country. Again, 25 cents of every extra dollar of inflation Canadians paid out for over a 2-year period in Canada went to oil and gas and mining extraction profits. That's not baseline, that's not workers, that's profits for these companies. There are real things out there causing inflation, and this entire debate has distracted us from actually talking about those real things and the real solutions we need to those things. And I think the most disheartening thing about the media debate that we're seeing on carbon pricing is that it keeps bringing back that concept that this is something to do with the way Canadians are facing hard times, which is just factually not accurate. And The problem we have when that happens is that we are basically eroding the factual foundation for discussions on things like climate policy. That's the danger there, more than carbon pricing itself. And I encourage anybody listening to this who's an environmentalist to not look at carbon pricing as the be-all and end-all of climate policy. It shouldn't be. It was never intended to be, and it definitely isn't the frame we want to adopt as part of the environment movement, to say that all of the hopes on climate change rest on this one policy wouldn't be accurate either. But at the same time, there is the foundation of truth there that is being challenged more than anything in this debate. And the real danger there is that we erode the common understanding we all have that allows us to discuss things like climate policy and find ways forward. And I think at this point, we'd all like to see more discussions on ways forward on climate change. There are lots of other policies that are coming up, like the emissions cap on oil and gas corporations, that could do a lot of good, that are not a form of carbon taxation. And my own history with carbon pricing as a concept is complex. When I first heard about the idea of a carbon tax, I didn't particularly like it. And the main reason why was, my understanding at the time, this was many years ago, was that it was going to cost individuals, and I thought going after big polluters was more important. As I began to learn about the rebate system, of course, I understood that actually this was in some ways a redistributive tax. And I think actually one of the sad things that we would see if carbon pricing went is not just its impact for the environment, but also the fact that it is giving back more money to low-income households, something that I actually very much support and think is very necessary right now. But I also want us to look at the attack on the truth that we are seeing by the oil and gas industry on issues of climate policy like the carbon tax in a different light than maybe we see it right now. It's true that there's a big media debate about the carbon pricing issue, and we don't want to fall into the framing of that debate by saying carbon pricing is the only way forward on climate change. But at the same time, we shouldn't see the truth as a rock that's being eroded constantly. We should be able to realize that the truth is also the light in a dark room, and it doesn't take a very big light to light up that dark room. And every time you hold your ground and say, listen, if you agree with carbon pricing or not, let's chat about its actual impact. Let's talk about the truth of the issue rather than all the hyperbole and all the misinformation that's out there. Every time you do that, and every time you bring the conversation back to a place of reality where we can actually have common dialogue and understanding, you are shining that light in that dark room. So it's a dual-edged sword. I think on the one hand, we do need to be better at turning around and saying we're not going to accept the framing of this media debate. And on the other hand, we need to be able to have real conversations with people about solutions. And in order to do that, we need to see solutions. That's one thing I hope that anybody listening to this who is involved in drafting policy, no matter who you support, is listening to and will take to heart. It's important that we have solutions. Before we end today, just a reminder that you can take action on environmental issues by visiting sierraclub.ca. We have tons of petitions, other actions and events, and regular news updates you can sign up for on the homepage. You can also find Sierra Club Canada on social media, and you can listen to the Environment in Canada podcast on Harbinger Media Network, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast also airs on CKUT Broadcast Radio in Montreal, 90.3 FM bi-weekly on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and on CHMA Radio in Sackville, New Brunswick on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Atlantic Daylight Time. Don't forget to click follow, subscribe so you get the latest episodes from us. And you can send us a question for the Q&A by emailing it to us at info@sierraclub.ca.